This is Grow Your Power, a show about homesteading and off-grid living based on my skills and experiences from living off-grid for 30 years. I am your host, Anne Greenfield, and I've gathered 4 local residents and myself who were recently forced into off-grid living when our homes were threatened by the Kincaid Fire of Northern California. As a forum today, we will discuss our reactions to packing up our essentials, evacuating to a safe place, and being without the grid, the power grid they call it. We will also talk about the positive effects of the crisis. It seems there were positive effects. None of us here today lost our homes thanks to the valiant efforts of 5,000 firefighters. But we were each of us was one of the 180,000 plus evacuees. I'd like to ask each of you here today to introduce yourself and give a short description of where you were when you heard news of the fire or the possible evacuations for yourself. What were your first reactions? Mary Helen?
Hi, thank you, Anne. My name is Mary Helen Franz, better known as MH. I actually had been preparing for not an evacuation, but the imminent PG&E shutoffs. Being an old-fashioned camper, I had been putting water in empty milk cartons and freezing them so I could be ready. I also had been having everything powered up. A friend of mine I spoke with said, well, I've got a bag at the door. We live in a bubble. It brought me back to the Tubbs fire. I'd moved to Sebastopol 2 weeks before. I knew one person. They called me, they texted me and said, I don't know where you live, MH, but I'd load up my car and evacuate the Kmart's on fire. I had no idea where the Kmart was. I'm like, the Kmart? I barely knew a 4-block radius. So I did. Boy, did I have a lot on hand. I hadn't even unpacked. So I threw everything in my bike. This time, I was more mindful. Wednesday, October 23rd, the fire had started, and I just do not mess with Mother Nature. I've been through Mount St. Helens. It erupted and landed in my college town at the University of Montana in Missoula. And so I prepared and put everything in my car, which is pretty small amount of stuff. This time I didn't have a year's worth of clothes. I just put some things on my back. I knew where my important papers were and my safe, and then was very mindful of a really good box of photos that I put together, and then one of my young son off the wall. I really didn't anticipate there being a fire in my town, but when it came to the warning on Saturday the 26th, I definitely was self-evacuating. I did the first time. I self-evacuated immediately to my friends in San Francisco. And I didn't want to be out of in the traffic. So I was out and gone by 4 o'clock on Saturday.
Okay, we'll come back to you and talk more about your evacuation. Dusty, can you introduce yourself and a short reaction view?
Yes, thank you, Anne. My name is Dusty Yao. I live north of Sebastopol, close to Grayton. I was paying attention to the news and the fire and the winds up until about Friday night and checked in with friends. And Saturday morning, I had an appointment south of Sebastopol. So I'm not usually out in Sebastopol that early in the morning. But as I was coming back from my appointment, I noticed how many people were driving south. I started to wonder what's going on and saw that at every gas station that I passed, there were long lines out into the street, and that was highly unusual for Sebastopol. So I just decided to go home and continue packing. I had packed a week before just in case, just to have a few things on hand and some first aid and some flashlights. So I just decided for fun I'd go out to the beach with my 2 dogs, and so I continued packing and didn't really think a whole lot of it, stayed in touch with friends, but I noticed my stress level was getting higher and higher because I was getting news from friends that the power was going off at 2 o'clock and I better hurry up, and it was already maybe noon or 1 o'clock. And so I was really feeling a lot of stress. I also just happened to have a flat tire in my car. So I was, and I was on the outs with my beloved, who we've been back and forth. So, so it was a little bit of a tough day for me. But I did, I really made myself focus and snap out of it in case this was serious. And I looked at my, the things what are priorities to me. I also really took a moment to thank the place that I live and even talk to the house and give, tell my house how much I have loved living there and how much I hope to come back. But if this has to happen, if a fire has to come through and clear out, then I'll do my best efforts to begin again. I also just took a minute for the trees and the land, and I know that it's so hard on all of the animals. I've been putting water out. So all of us were feeling stressed, and all of nature was feeling stressed as well. So that was kind of how my Saturday went, and I continued packing well until just up until they turned the power out, which was in my area about closer to 8 o'clock, like 7:45. I left. I had family records that nobody else in my family has. I have genealogy, so it was a priority one. I packed 2 bags of clothes, and it helped me realize how much junk I have that I really don't need, and I need to go back and clear out and give away.
All right, let's go. We'll talk more about packing and the lack of power in a minute.
Thank you.
If we could have an intro from you, David.
Excuse me. Good morning. My name is David McConkey. I'm born and raised here in Sonoma County, so I'm kind of a veteran of the earthquake, fire, flood scene. I got wind of the fire initially, like when everybody did, just by some of the general commotion out in the public sphere. On Thursday, I took my camera and I ran up to the geysers I thought perhaps I could get some early photographs of the fires. And that was sort of my first inkling of what was going on at that point.
All right. Well, I'll have a few comments myself here. When the fire started, I was at home or at my partner Bob's place. I can't remember exactly. The maps of the Kincaid fire put us at the southwest edge of a possible evacuation area, and the fire was spreading rapidly from the northeast towards us. Electricity was shut down on Saturday, I believe. News from our phones or computer was scanty. About all we knew was the fire was burning about 10,000 new acres a day. My first concern was for my daughter and her family who live in Healdsburg, which was at the edge of the flames. And my daughter herself was 3,000 miles away in Toronto, Canada, away from her daughter and her husband, and freaking out. I knew she was freaking out, and I felt so empathetic with my daughter. My other daughter was in New Mexico and on the phone constantly, just afraid, just expressing her concern. And it was wonderful to feel my family together and contacting each other and caring about what was happening. So that was the first reactions. And Bob, do you want to introduce yourself and say something about your first reactions?
Sure. My name's Bob, and I'm Anne's best friend and technical wizard, helping out here at Cows. I live by the project, and I was absorbed into 3 or 4 different projects, and especially at this end of the year, I was busy with a lot of harvest-related activities, and so I didn't pay a lot of attention to the fire that was about an hour and a half away, and I live in a small place at the edge of the country where there was a well, and when the power went off, we lost water, and I thought that was inconvenient, but I thought that the odds of actually having to evacuate were tremendously small. So I didn't do anything about it. I didn't really pack. And then the police were going through the streets at 4 a.m, and I threw, let's say my harvest, 2 pairs of pants, 14 pairs of socks, and a little bit of underwear into a tub, and we left. We left running. So that was kind of how it came down for me. It was total mayhem. It was extremely disorienting, and little or no preparation at all.
Thank you, Bob. We did make it, though. We survived.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's talk more about packing up and how we dealt with that. And I guess I'll go first in that for me it was kind of a personal crisis that came up because Bob and I both packed our cars. We live about 5 minutes away from each other. And I thought we would consolidate and go in one car. And Bob thought we would take our own cars, which made sense in the sense that my car would have burned up if I left it. But I just went into more like the first week of my life, and I freaked out. Don't leave me. I don't want to be alone. I was kind of amazed to see that reaction on my part, but I looked at all my stuff. I looked at my car. I looked at my fiddle that was in my car, and I said, it doesn't matter. I can leave all of this. It really doesn't matter. And finally, Bob decided that we could go together, and I was so glad because the caravan of cars, it was surreal at dawn on Sunday morning. And we only had communication through our cell phones, and we didn't know where we were going. So I'm really glad we were together. We ended up going to Bob's mother in Napa and had a really good mattress there. No electricity, but a great mattress and generosity on the part of Mom and sister.
Well, this is Mary Helen, and I really have kind of an opposite experience. I kind of go into disaster mode, to organize, to be thoughtful, to see if my neighbors are ready. I thought, well, when there was a warning, and I knew my surroundings now, and it got close to Windsor, and I mean, it was either going to jump on our side of the highway or not. And the warning, I thought, no, I am not going to wait. And like I spoke before, I had just condensed my life and weeded through 2/3 and sold and donated 2/3 of my life. So I'm in a compact situation. And, really the one thing that I was very mindful of from the tubs is get a good box of my photos, and, which is the toughest part when you're moving across the country. And so it was heavy, and I have it. And I was somewhat prepared, and I really didn't want to be where Anne was at 4 a.m, or Bob trying to get out of there. And so off I went. I tend to be an eternal optimist, as given by me. My son gave me a cup from New York City called the Eternal Optimist. And so I was really not thinking that our house was going down, that our homes were going down. I live downtown Sebastopol. And so my thought was, okay, just go. I have a dear friend in San Francisco. I am so incredibly lucky. It's completely comfortable. And I'll tell you where I went from reflections from there, because I was a lucky one, really lucky.
Thank you.
Well, Dusty is here speaking, and when I left my house on Saturday evening, I really didn't have much on my mind except for going to the beach. And so I ended up staying I pulled over into downtown Sebastopol. I was pretty exhausted, so I slept on the street until about 4 a.m. when the cars were coming through saying mandatory evacuation, get out now. And I woke with a start, and I was actually feeling quite adventurous and, really nervous. And so my friend and I, he got in his car, and I was in my vehicle and drove to down Highway 12, away from all the traffic going to 101 and down Main Street, Sebastopol, and we went to the coast. It was a big risk. I had no idea what we were getting into. It was very disorienting with all the power out and no electricity, no lights. And so I called people from out of town, just 2 people, to say where I was, my brother and my former husband, and that felt really good to at least be in touch, because I knew I wouldn't have power. I wouldn't have phone connection, cell connection outside of Sebastopol and at the coast. So we ended up down at Point Reyes Station. And I have to say, at like 6 a.m. Sunday morning, Point Reyes Station, there's a bunch of Sebastopol people walking around, and 2 bakeries with generators and coffee. Thank you very much. It was quite the social event, and I had a really good time there.
If I could jump in for a second,
Sure.
A good friend of mine had a fully prepared camper, and that's exactly where they went. They
Nice.
went down there, and they said it was great. You could stay where you normally weren't allowed to stay, and everybody was prepared and enjoying it.
Yes, and even though the town did not have power, there was no electricity down through Marin. It was a really good time, and I stayed until about, sometime till I watched a big cloud of smoke come in and was having, pretty uncomfortable breathing. So contacted my cousins who live in Marin County. They did not have electricity either, so I just went down there, and our dogs got along great, and was just hanging out, talking about family history, and I had broke out all my photographs. It was really... I had a really good time, actually. I tried to make the best of it, and I didn't know what was going to happen behind me in terms of my house or the land or my neighbors. I was in contact with my neighbors. I did text people before, as I could, people in my personal groups and my, and my neighbors, and I felt pretty safe. And pretty content with, if I lost everything, then this, I could just begin again. Yeah.
Thank you, Dusty.
Yeah.
So, with regard to what we took along with us and how we packed, I'm kind of fortunate in one sense that I've actually spent a good amount of time over the last several years divesting myself of possessions anyways. I've become kind of nomadic and more like a gypsy as I've gotten older, and so I don't have a whole lot of things in the first place. So what's funny, when I did go to leave, I grabbed my camera, of course, which I have with me everywhere I go, my computer, my passport, because my passport's like my bug out kit in the Trump era. Like, I always got my passport right there, ready to go. A couple heirlooms, a bedroll, and a blanket. Pretty much. We're traveling pretty light. My son grabbed some sort of the same things. When they woke us up early on the morning, I guess that was Saturday morning, to tell us to bug out. They went through the streets with the sirens, as we've all alluded to, and I woke up and I didn't feel particularly scared. It didn't. I mean, obviously it was smoky, and there was definitely a sense of dis-ease in the air, but I didn't feel very, very scared per se. And I woke my son up and I said, "Come on, let's get out of here. We got to go." And the first instinct was to drive west from Sebastopol and ultimately south towards Tamales and Point Reyes. It's funny how all the Sebastopolians are all headed to the one place. Definitely not out on 116 on the highways. But instead, we ended up going up on Barlow Lane between Mill Station and Occidental Road, and we pulled over at an orchard and turned off the lights and kind of surveyed the situation. And the glow from the fire was way, 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 way north. And at that point, I told my son, "Let's just go back to the house and make some coffee." We still had water, and we still had gas. So we went back to the house, made coffee, sat out in the car, charged our devices, listened to the radio, and sort of like tried to assess where we were at and how desperate it was that we got out of there. I was trying not to terrify my son. He's a young man, but he's grown, but he's also a young man. We ultimately listened to the news for about an hour or two, and then decided to go back inside and go to sleep until and get back up a couple hours later and kind of check in, and that was kind of our approach to it. We ended up basically not leaving, and then there's more to that when you're...
Right. I wanted to add 2 things that I packed that turned out to be really handy. One was a Corona steel hand grinder, so we could grind coffee beans.
If you have electricity.
Priorities.
Yeah, we didn't have electricity at his mother's in Napa, and I was really glad that we had a coffee grinder.
Got his breakfast invitation.
I mean, if you have coffee and bourbon, you could just walk through the flames.
And the other thing was a 1-burner propane cylinder stove. Which was very portable and very handy to have at least 1 burner of fuel for cooking.
Yes.
Yeah, I had that at the ready myself, a 2-burner, all my kind of camping gear and so forth. But I didn't take them. I knew I had a safe place to go, and and feel like really, really lucky.
We were told that it could be 5 days without power. That we should pack for 5 days.
Which it was.
Before we had power, it was, yeah. And I don't know what are the biggest, when we move into the off-power situation, I realized that one of the big problems with being off-power was that we couldn't have any water because our well was electric start. And that just pissed me off. It's like technology that we're so dependent on, electricity we're so dependent on. And I thought later, because I was a homesteader for 30 years, I thought later, why didn't we just get a bucket and some sawdust and have it handy for the eventuality of not being able to flush the toilet? You have anything to add?
Yeah, because because I'm on a well. When the electricity went out, then we wound up having to carry flush water from the neighbor's small farm in 5-gallon buckets back to my house. So flush water was a hot item in the inventory. That was unusual.
Definitely.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead, but it really has put me on notice of how those little things that make such a big difference, that, to have those on hand and to be prepared when something, and we're not out of the woods yet. It is still quite dry out there.
Correct.
And it is still, there's still a lot of safety we need to watch for each other, as well as, what we're doing, not to run heavy equipment and so on. And
Show of hands, who's repacked? Anybody repacked yet?
I have not unpacked.
I learned that I could unpack and pack really quickly.
Yeah.
So, this last run, this is the group that I would take again. I almost left my photo album box and photos at my friend's. My sister, my family's in Minnesota. She's like, yeah, you can just visit them when you see her, and you won't have this heavy thing to take back and forth. And my friend said, oh, okay, I'll see you every October. I don't want to believe that. And like Dusty said, there's a small fire that just hit. And
I'll see you every October.
Right.
Oh, my goodness.
And I don't know what I think this is our hurricane.
Also to Dusty's point, if I may jump in,
Yeah.
I was up in Pine Flats. We were discussing before we began here, just not yesterday, but the day before, again with my camera, trying to get some images. It's still very much a live fire scene up there. It's still very much a live fire scene. The earth was completely scorched. There were smoldering logs everywhere up there, and they're all, they're unattended.
Yeah.
It's a huge fire scene, and the resources are spread thin, and the fire crews were coming up and down the Pine Flats Road in bulk and heavy equipment. It's still a very active scene, so it's not. They've gotten a hold of it, but it still bears consciousness.
Readiness.
Yeah, readiness and consciousness about it.
And we keep being warned that should the fires jump Highway 101, that there's 40 years of brush, dry tinder brush, just on the other side of 101, and that's kind of a fire nest, possible fire nest.
I just, on that topic, it's interesting to me. Of course, I lived in Berkeley in my 20s, so I have lived in California and other places. But in Minnesota, I mean, we have a lot of vegetation, and, you know, in the fall, everything comes down. People are bagging it up. They take care of it. The city comes by and picks up. For the first time, I'm starting my third year here, I actually saw people do that. I actually saw people trying to do some yard work and pulling things together. And it was always struck the first time I lived in California for 10 years that nobody does yard work here. And now I think we're going to have to, you know, be citizens one after another and maybe help the neighbor. I'd like to get some kids involved. I'd like to pay them. I'd like to see what they come up with as for a solution to start getting everything, all the debris. You know, we don't have the water, so somehow we have to compost it, or we have to come up with innovative ideas of what we're going to do with all of this. Because one thing's for sure, you know, the climate's warming and it's not going the other way.
Right.
And that leaves us with a lot of debris for fires.
With regard to that debris, excuse me, one thing I did notice when I was walking around in town on Saturday was the difference between the tub fire and the Kincaid fire with regard to the materials that were being burned. Mostly it was organic materials, predominantly in this recent fire, backcountry brush and trees, and that sort of a campfire smell that goes along to it. Whereas in tubs, you know, if you consider the amount of materials that, you know, the Coffee Park alone, 4,000 homes, consider what's in your home, you know, paint and fiberglass and plastic and car batteries and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. The amount of stuff that we import into our environment, all of that stuff had gone up in flames in Coffee Park instantly. And the difference in the smoke, I don't want to say the smoke quality because both of them are bad, but the Tubbs fire, the smoke was sinister. The smoke, I could feel it on my skin. It had that sort of a presence about it. Whereas this fire, it was also heavy and hard on my lungs. I could still hear I still feel hoarse as a result of it. But my point about all that was, it was just interesting, the observation, and to observe the two differences in the fires.
Yeah.
I think water is a big issue. The fact that it can be inaccessible because if electricity is off. I'm suggesting that we think about that and have some fire storage, water storage, like tanks. Everybody should have a tank of water, or rain catchment in place so that you're not so dependent on this corporation for keeping the electricity on. Other ways to deal with the lack of electricity I'll go into in a few minutes, but anybody else have suggestions about the water?
Yeah, I read that you're supposed to, you know, what do you do in the fire when you have to evacuate? I read that you're supposed to fill your tub, fill everything you can with water. So at least have some access right away, you know, because we're not all on, you know, I live downtown in a duplex, and, you know, I don't know, I guess I could get a kid's pool and put it in the back, but, you know,
you never lost water because you had city water.
Right.
But you could.
I could, right. And so I will do that. If that happens again, I'll fill up my tub. You know, I think that there's personal responsibility, and then I think that there's collective. And I think we have to start with ourselves and for readiness and preparation, and then we go out, our neighbors, their neighbors, and we collect as a team. And I do believe that at the Sebastopol Grange, there'll be some discussions tonight. I know many people that are getting together with neighbors. We're going to try to find a different way to operate in the future with microgrids and other things.
I think oddly enough, I'm not positive. I think oddly enough, it is against federal law to collect rainwater. I believe I've read that.
Federal law?
Yes.
I've heard there were counties or cities that would disallow it. But
because it's interfering. I mean, their argument is because it interferes with the watershed, obviously, in the the natural state of water flow. I think there's probably more a case of they just don't want the competition. They don't want people to be self-reliant in that respect. But I'm going to look into it when I get home and double check and make sure. I know I've read that in the past, that it was illegal to collect rainwater. It could be a state by state, could be a county by county.
Yeah, I read that 1 inch of rain would give you 600 gallons. Bob points out that it doesn't say how big the system is to produce that, but it can produce a lot.
Well, we need the rain.
With regards to water, there may be issue of mosquitoes. There may be issue of other things going on. But I certainly have a 55-gallon drum. Actually, I think I have 2 of them, and I catch my rainwater because it just comes off my roof, and it's there. It is. But I also
we'll be coming out to see you.
I didn't give you my address. But I do live out in the country, and I did lose power, and so I did go home on Tuesday. Didn't have electricity for several days, but I had 5-gallon water containers filled so that I could cap it off and so that it could be clean in a moment's notice or a moment's need. And I had drinking water, 4 or 5 gallon drinking waters, because I went into sort of hyper water mode, I guess. But what was I going to say? The thing that I notice, off grid, is that I lost everything in my freezer, which means that I lost all of my frozen garden soups and items and so on. When I got back, they were pretty well melted, and I'm still cleaning up after that. So that's an area of an area that I know that I personally could improve. But
get those milk cartons frozen.
Yeah,
I had absolutely nothing lost. I took
nice.
I've been freezing, as I said, water and milk cartons.
Yeah,
and I put one on every level in the refrigerator and the freezer. I didn't lose milk, nothing for 5 days.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, spread it around.
Great.
I think that's how the pioneers did it.
Yeah. Well, my worms are happy, so I'm somebody wins all the way around where I live. So it's perfect. But
it's almost divine. It's almost divine justice that the earthworms get taken care of,
yes.
considering what they had to endure.
And they in turn will help my garden next year, as will the ash that came down.
And I keep reverting to things that I learned by living off grid for 30 years locally here. And as far as refrigeration, I didn't have a refrigerator for 30 years. And so what I did was just to build a cupboard and put it outside on the north side of my building and have it vented at the bottom and at the top. And I was able to keep things cool enough there. There's some things that, milk would only last a couple days, or meat would. But you could keep a lot if you just keep it cool. And I also suggest that we maybe return to some old skills like canning and smoking and sun drying and try to get a solar oven together. Or I have friends that have a cob oven that they built that just takes a small fire to be able to cook or bake.
I know people that have solar ovens.
Yeah, I do know how to can. It's just one of those years that I just was like, I'll put it in my freezer. And I relied heavily on that. But I think I will go back and revisit my canning skills. Yeah, for sure, because that will that will preserve those things, those items.
I even canned meat, and it turns out so good. You just cook at a high temperature this jar filled with just the meat and all its juices.
Wow.
It's really good.
Marinated.
Yeah.
My son and I, being consummate bachelors, we have virtually nothing in our house ever.
Nothing to spoil in the fridge.
There's virtually nothing ever in our house.
Coffee.
Coffee was good, and then we found So we had some rice and some beans and stuff like that up in the cupboard. It's a great opportunity to be resourceful and to be creative. We ate wonderfully. Actually, it wasn't normal, but it was wonderful. Yeah. We set out across town to raid my mom's refrigerator. She had to evacuate, and their power was out, and my mom was always stocked. So we were able to get some eggs, and we were able to get some salsa and a little bit of bread, and it was actually a really nice exercise in resourcefulness.
Absolutely.
There was sort of a nice growing experience for my son and I as far as that goes.
Nice.
I guess
I'm going to hear more about that in just a minute.
Yes, I was trying to avoid jumping ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I just wanted to mention hand tools, that we should all have more hand tools around that don't require electricity, gas, a hand saw for cutting a few branches if you need to. Yeah.
Good point.
And I really try to promote in my shows, and this is like the 23rd show I've done on off-grid living, or just ways that we can have some independence and not be so dependent on the system of the big corporations. And those hand tools. And the thing is that whenever we have a convenience, and we're so addicted to so many conveniences, electric things in our kitchen, that everything we have that makes life easier or more convenient also takes power away from us. They're depowering too.
Well, it doesn't create the independence. It's more dependent, life. And I think, I'm really hoping, since I live downtown, but I really feel a lot of the energy right now of people banding together and thinking of solutions that you're saying. Even though I live downtown, I have a whole camper area that's in my garage, and, I knew I could live without power for a long time. I'd be okay,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with MH is to gather our resources and see, get to know our neighbors a little bit better. What are your hidden resources that I don't know, and here are mine? I have an electric chainsaw, and how can we share that if something happens in your neck of the woods? Fortunately, my neighbor has an electric chainsaw too. So, and he had a generator that he was offering me, but he needed some work on it, so he offered me the last day of our power outage. But still, it is a good time to get to know neighbors, share stories, get to know who they are, share your resources if you feel it's appropriate, and it is a really good opportunity, and that is what natural disasters can bring. They can bring us together. I was sharing a bottle of wine with under candlelight with my neighbors, and we were talking story. When I did come back home, and just to make sure that they were okay, because they're elderly, and it's it's just. It just felt really good. It felt really good. It felt more like home than when I, before when I left. I knew I could count on them, and I know that they can count on me, and they know that they can count on me. So, so get to know your neighbors and share. That's my, my lesson here.
Yeah, it seems to be a great and perfect excuse for re-examining your values, one's values, and for us all to examine it at large, and to see what's becoming of the resources, and to question whether we should be selling all the water available to a corporation or two, things like that, things that really come home as necessary in a situation like what we've been through.
Absolutely. Yeah. I kind of wished I was back in the hood, to be honest. My friends wouldn't let me leave in San Francisco during the Tubbs fire. I was there 2 weeks, and as grateful as I was, I still felt displaced. I'm really grateful. I have a lot of friends, and we were really keeping in touch too. I really appreciated that. A lot of texting. Some people were doing a lot of good things on Facebook, showing, the status. I have a friend that kept going back to Grayton, and then they'd take pictures pictures and let us see what it looked like. It was just so displacing, and part of me wished that I was just there with everybody, even knowing nobody was there either. But I agree with you that it's a special moment that brings people together, the disasters.
Plus, there's a really interesting dynamic that comes out in crisis modes between people. I've encountered people, like I said, I was out walking around quite a lot, and sometimes people are, at first, they're very defensive maybe, or scared, or like, who are you, what are you doing here, or why are you out here, kind of a thing. But also people are very quick to adapt to being kindred. In other words, if you extend a courtesy to them, or you extend, just check in with somebody, a stranger, it's interesting how fast that facade comes down, and how much people really appreciate it, and it's a lovely way to interact with people that we don't necessarily have in situations that are not crisis.
Good point.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear more, David, about something you mentioned the other day about what happened with your son and you. As far as a bonding, I believe that...
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit in the writing group. It was the overall experience of this, that we decided to stay back and sort of fend for ourselves. It was an exercise in resourcefulness. It was an exercise in being present with each other without the distractions of internet, without the distractions of work, or whatever all the stuff is. And it afforded us a couple opportunities to to be sitting there at 10 o'clock at night with no power under the light of a single candle. There's nowhere to hide in that environment. And after the cursory chit chat has sort of all been expressed, then you start going deeper. And in the father-son relationship, you don't always get that. There's always sort of the paternal sort of a roadblock in the way. But for one of the first times, my son and I have been together, our whole lives. But really, for the first time, we sat there together as kind of like two adults, two men in the room, And he talked to me about his fears, which I didn't really even consider, because I was a certified firefighter in Utah, and I was fire trained in the military. So I don't really have this. I didn't have this sense of fear, but I took it for granted that he felt the same way, because he's a very calm young man. Generally, and but he kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit when he asked me, well, how come you're not afraid, Dad? Which was pretty illuminating. It's like, wow, I took it for granted that he wasn't afraid, but he kind of he showed some vulnerability and said, hey, I'm a little bit afraid. And we went down that rabbit hole. It was a lovely conversation, and it was a very bonding sort of a moment. And I think the overall experience for me, and for what I'm grateful for, is sort of that experience of simpatico. My boy is a perfect running mate for disaster. Nobody I'd rather have with me.
Nice.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I experienced an interesting thing with Bob, because we rarely spend 24 continuous hours together. Right. And this time it was like 4 days, more like 100 continuous hours. And it felt really wonderful that we had this singular goal of surviving and taking care of each other. And I felt a new kind of immersion in our relationship.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I felt, even though I was at my friend's house and I've known her my whole life, we grew up together in Minnesota, I just felt so displaced. And it took me a couple of days to feel any kind of groundedness. I think after I'd been able to touch bases with people and all my relatives in Minnesota, my son, I have only one son and he's in New York, and so all the good communication and the love energy was great. And then I could kind of settle down by Tuesday and realize I'm in an incredibly gorgeous place. San Francisco was beautiful. It was just, they live in a beautiful area. right by the water, right in Russian Hill, and I love her teenage kids, and so I was able to kind of relax and try to stay positive. But one thing I do want to say that is that in reflection, I've written a lot about this. All of a sudden, I don't know which day it was when I got home, all I could think of was, this was Mother Nature's fury, right? And it's going to be all of us in the world here that are going to take turns. And I pray that we as humans treat this climate warming and this new place we're at more seriously, and collectively, individually, try to do something. But what I was so resonating the whole time is just the feeling of uncertainty. That was the hardest thing for me, is uncertainty. And then I got to thinking about all the people on the southern border and the Mexican border, and just like, okay, yep, I was talking to some people. Yeah, I'm a refugee from Sebastopol when I was in San Francisco, and all I could think of is, oh my gosh, look at what they have to go through and the uncertainty. And this was a natural disaster, but humans are creating their evacuation and their refugee status, and I cannot reconcile that. I had a luxury vacation, and they have no choices, and how they sustain that time after time, day after day. Mine was 5 days, 5 easy days, and the people, the Kurds, and just what humans are doing to make people feel this excruciating uncertainty is unbelievable.
Thank you, Mary Helen.
You mentioned, MH, that Mary Helen, for those of you in Radio Land, Mary Helen.
MH.
The amount of writing and stuff, or I think we talked about a little bit in writers group last Sunday.
We're all in a writers group.
We're all in a writers group here one way or another. And I think that's one of the things, too, that I found that I've noticed that the result of this process, as well as other experiences that require above average participation. And that is the prolific amount of like journaling, for example, that I do. I journal anyways, but sometimes I struggle for something to say, or we go to writing groups so we can kind of keep our brains going. But then something like this happens, and like my mind just fills up with stuff to say. It's not all fire related, but it's definitely fire stimulated or crisis stimulated. Which I guess I'm referring to sort of a silver lining, I guess, of this whole thing.
Exactly.
If you're a writer or a journalist, or in my case, a photographer.
And I felt after we came home and the evacuation was lifted for our area, which was on Wednesday, I guess. In the next few days, I felt like this creative flow that was happening as kind of a reaction to, I don't know, all the stress or something. I think Bob mentioned that too. So that's interesting. And also being at Bob's mother's place, there was nothing to do, really. It's just no electricity, no media, nothing to do. So there was a lot of being instead of doing, which I appreciated. It was relaxing, and I thought of business as usual and all of that I was able to let go of. And it was letting go of a lot of anxiety when I thought of all that business as usual. It's like, oh my God, do I really want to do that again? So lots of strange effects from a crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I felt some of that too, Anne. I felt kind of a big release, maybe, or something, like letting go of responsibility to be on email and be, in touch and check on my, my projects, my work, and do electronic things and watch my TV show or whatever, whatever it is. I was really grateful to check in with my cousins and to hang out and just sort of like tell story by candlelight and listen to their kids and share some other stuff that they didn't know about my family, with them, my siblings and I with their family. It was, it was a great time for reflection, and I write every day as well. And man, the fodder and just the stuff and just the memories and the reflection, it wasn't all fire related, but it was more family related. I tend to be really focused on family. I do genealogy, and I, writing about my mom and writing about my sisters and just, sorry, I didn't write about my brothers, but that was okay.
Nobody likes their brother.
Yeah, no, I love my brothers. I love my brothers. They're great. My brothers are great. But that, it just, I lost 2 sisters and one of them fairly recently. And so it was just really a great time to slow down and quiet and be in the quiet of my house where I didn't have, things humming and little lights on and refrigerator going and all of that. I think I took advantage of the time, and I'm like forever grateful to the fire department, to the Grayton Fire Department, to their families, for what they knew they were sacrificing for the police, for their families, for how they sacrifice every day. And our fire department in Grayton is a volunteer fire department right now, and it's just a tremendous amount of giving that people did and sacrificing that people did during this. And we came out, I came out fine. And I still feel for the people who are still trying to pull things together and pull their life together after losing their homes, and maybe valuables and things that they didn't think about packing. And, there's a lot that's coming up for me in terms of my writing, in terms of, our surrounding communities. I can't help but think about them, and of course, and the loss and the sacrifices and the things that are still, that they have to sift through, that they have to process. So, there's a lot right now that's happening in our communities that, I keep going back to in conversation, obviously, and focus. But yeah, writing is one of those things that I highly recommend to anybody who needs to work through or process through some heavy stuff, whether you were immediately affected by the fires or not, or, even just to reflect on your own personal history is really valuable. I can't say how valuable that is. As we all... There's 4 of us here who are in a writing group. So
self-awareness is one of the biggest things that came up for me during this. Yeah, it makes you stop and think, see things differently, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sorry.
And it encourages resourcefulness and creativity of dealing with a new situation, and that's a good thing to learn how to do all the time. Let's exercise our resourcefulness all the time.
I was just going to add to that. It's such a cathartic process to write anyways, as a rule of thumb. And the amount of self-discovery. If you're like me and you refuse to pay for therapy, writing is my therapy. And so it comes out jumbled and a little bit fragmented and kind of hard to piece together a common theme. But that's not really the point of it anyways. The point of it is more the act of transferring it from your heart and your mind through your arm, through your pen or your keyboard or whatever you do. That process in and of itself is very healing.
So you can see it better. I see it better when I see it in writing. Or it's come out.
Right. Or just to purge yourself of it. Just to create a medium by which to express it, even if you're only expressing it to yourself in your own journals.
Yeah, that's it. And it doesn't have to make sense, and nobody has to read it. You don't even have to read it over just as long. The process of getting it out.
And it could be messy. Yeah. And it could be ugly and dark or light and beautiful. Yeah. Whatever it is.
I just wanted to mention that I so wanted to come back and make meals for the responders and, the people who needed it. And the World Kitchen, was set up at the fairgrounds where a lot of things were set up. And I just shot over there, and they had kind of just packed up and left. And I just want to say how daunting it was to see the preparation that went into this rescue, and just fields and fields of dome tents and larger, like military tents, and organized tables with signs and rescue vehicles all over the place. I can't help but also remember and be struck by the gratitude of opportunity it is that we have in this country, as opposed to what goes on around the world. And I think that for us specifically, Bob said maybe it's every October. Well, I could just get us right into a climate conversation, but I won't. But I think that that's going to be a positive thing also, is that I think that most people are going to have to face their natural Mother Nature's fury disasters, and we're going to have to figure out ways to minimize what we can as man-made contributions.
Thank you, Mary Helen. We're going to have to end our discussion today. I would like to promote my show, which is Grow Your Power. You can go to soundcloud.com. And there's a couple shows in particular, Living a Better Life and Learning and Making, that have a lot of these practical suggestions for how to do things without the grid, without the big corporations.
Can I just really quickly say thank you to all the first responders, of course. I know we've all alluded to that in the course of this, but I think it's important to throw it out there one more time.
Definitely.
They show up for us every time.
Yes.
They show up for us every time.
Remarkable.
Thank you for listening.